Well, it was 6 months ago that Justin Trudeau promised to pull back Canada's CF-18s from the fight against ISIS. But they're still there, dropping even more bombs at times than ever before. What is the latest strategy behind Canada's fight against ISIS? And just how united is the cabinet on the issue? Chantel's in Edmonton tonight. Andrew's away again this week. Jennifer Ditchburn joins us from Ottawa. And along for the ride this week, Shachi Kurl, Executive Director of the Angus Reid Institute. Shachi is in Toronto this evening. She's usually in Vancouver. Let me start with you, Chantel. And, you know, on the point about just how clearly stated our policy is in the fight against ISIS, how clear is it to you right now?
The only thing that is completely clear to me is that we will be continuing to participate in the military mission against ISIS. So we will have a contribution in some form. From all the smoke signals that I've seen so far, I'm assuming we will be replacing our contribution to air bombing by something else. That's as far as I can tell.
Any clearer to you, Jennifer?
No, that's about it. We're against ISIS, and we're in favor of having some form of military mission, but beyond that, no. I mean, who knows what the specifics are? We still are waiting. We're waiting and waiting.
Shachi, Canadians have been watching all this unfold over the last little while, but I wonder, where do they stand on how Canada stands in this fight against ISIS? Do they have a clear feeling in the surveys and the research that you do?
Well, I think the way they evaluate it really comes down to the view they've had over the last 15 months. So they understand that there is a bombing mission that may or may not be continuing. It seems that it may not. There is a training mission, and there is a sense of doing something. They know that Canada is part of an international coalition, an international effort against ISIS. This change in the conversation is probably something that they are not as conditioned to and probably not paying quite as much attention to as the way it's been laid out for them over the last 15 months.
All right. Well, over the last 7 days, at least, there has been a change in the conversation in Ottawa, perhaps best summed up in this couple of exchanges that happened in the House of Commons today. Watch this.
When the defense minister was asked, what is the Liberals' anti-ISIS plan, he said, go ask the Minister of Foreign Affairs. He's in Rome. Well, now the minister is back from Rome. Has he given his defense minister his marching orders?
Contrary to the former government, this government will act together on this issue to fight terrorism. It's why we work very hard to have an integrated plan with the Minister of Defense. We did a great job. The Minister of International Development, we did a great job, and I did my best as well.
The Liberals are constantly rationalizing their behavior and making excuses for ISIS. And now the defense minister is blaming climate change for ISIS. Does the defense minister actually believe that climate change creates jihadi terrorists?
Mr. Speaker, the complexity of conflict, you have to look at many different aspects of what causes it. And when it comes to ISIL, Taliban, Boko Haram, and the atrocities that they commit, we have to be smart about it to making sure that these atrocities are not committed again. And we're going to take the time to make sure that we get this plan right.
You know, it's answers like that last one from the defense minister that he's been giving over the last week. And this is somebody who's not unfamiliar with the fight against terrorists. After all, he was very much involved in it in Afghanistan. His answers have made it seem like there's a lot more at stake here in the government's decision-making process right now than just whether or not to pull the planes out. Now, you also hear from Stéphane Dion, kind of a different tone, and that's led some to wonder, certainly the opposition is wondering, is if there's a split inside cabinet on the way ahead on the policy against ISIS. Any indication of that? Chantel, what are you hearing?
If there was a split, it would be part of cabinet debate, not something anyone would resign over. It wouldn't be surprising in the sense that the initial position of pulling out the CF-18s and not taking part in the bombing mission and the mission as defined by Stephen Harper never was received with unanimity within the Liberal family at large. Remember back when Lloyd Axworthy, others like him, thought that Justin Trudeau had rushed to say he wouldn't support that mission. What I get more from these statements is that the Liberals are trying to put a package together that will change the nature of the mission, but that will not look like Canada is doing less than it has been doing. And that is a balance that is hard to achieve. They're not, I think, doing it for Canadian public opinion, frankly. They're doing it to satisfy the allies in the coalition that Canada will still be pulling its weight.
Jennifer, you're nodding in agreement there?
Well, I come at it a little bit different. I think if you parse what Stéphane Dion was saying, it's exactly what it is, that they're trying to put together, as Chantal said, a package that has humanitarian, diplomatic, and military, all the pieces together. But I see it as more of a communications exercise, and I think that's where we're probably, the delay is happening. It's probably not to do with the military plan, but it's to do with, okay, we've got to get this whole thing together to present to the public as an integrated plan that will be so much more comprehensive than what the Conservatives had on the table before. So I think that's, probably what's at play there.
Okay, well, I see the Defence Minister's comments taking it a little deeper than that, unless he's just buying time on the issue. But he really seems to be suggesting that you got to go to the old root causes question here too, that he saw it happen in Afghanistan, that it's not just about the fight. You can pound the terrorists, but you've got to have an idea of why they feel the way they do about you as Westerners, and what you're going to do in that country once it ends, once the fight ends. He seems to be looking at them in a much deeper way, or he's buying time.
But on that particular front, it's one of those things you could probably think about those issues for years without coming up with the magical answer to what you should do. And I think he's thinking of not just root causes, but all kinds of ripple effects. I think he used that word, ripple effects. If you do X, is Y and Z going to happen in a particular theater? But as I said before, I don't know if they're ever going to come up with the magic solution. So at some point, they're just going to have to put a military plan together with the humanitarian and the diplomatic piece, and present it to the public. I'm not convinced that this long stretch of time that they haven't already put together the military plan.
And Peter, can we agree that for all this interesting talk about having the right balance and finding the root cause and what you do after, we are not the lead players on this. And in the end, those issues will be debated and decided at the coalition table and not in the House of Commons. This is about the Canadian contribution. It's significant, but it is not so central to this effort that this discussion will change the outcome of what the coalition does to handle this issue.
Shachi, any of this sort of debate around policy, does it resonate with Canadians?
Well, the mission itself resonates with Canadians in a big way. There is a large appetite to continue in the vein that Canada has been going, which is both bombing and training. I've been watching this issue for the better part of a full year, and we're looking at brand new numbers that indicate that 2/3 of Canadians would either like to see the bombing campaign continue or even be stepped up. So again, there is almost a gut feeling or an innate feeling around wanting to go and get bad guys, and that always feels like there's a big bump around it, whether it's post-Ottawa or post-Quebec, our own domestic terror attacks, or something like the Paris attacks. There's always a feeling like, well, let's go do something about it, and I've talked about that. So if there is a desire on part of this government to bring Canadians along and sort of into a change in the mission, that is something that's going to have to be clearly communicated, because again, Canadians are thinking about this in a much more simplified and visceral way.
Either communicated better or changed their mind on their approach. Has there been any indication, Jennifer, in Ottawa that they're in any way reconsidering the issue about the CF-18s?
None that I could detect, and we should note that the CF-18s are still there, so there's not going to be any gap or anything between the bombing missions and whatever they happen to put on the table. But in just picking up on what Shachi was saying about the communications, I actually would argue that Minister Sajjan is a good person to communicate this plan. I mean, when you really listen to what he's saying and his experience on the ground, I think there's a lot of value there. He's talked about the fact in Afghanistan that funding that went to contractors in Afghanistan ended up pitting different groups together on the ground. So he was the person that was closest to the action, but decision makers above were making decisions that could could wind up screwing everything up. So I think actually he's a very legitimate spokesperson for this mission. It's just that it's taking so long for them to communicate what they're actually going to do.
Let me show you another piece of tape. And it's to do directly with the Prime Minister and this issue of, why can't you do bombing and the various other missions that you want to do in terms of the fight against ISIS? It came up in our little face-to-face the other night with Malik from Regina. This is what happened there.
I saw your manifesto saying that we will train the Kurds and empower them to fight their own war, which is fantastic. That could be a long-term plan. But short-term plan, the reality of the ground is that Kurds are not trained. So we can do both things simultaneously, right? Don't you think that have 6 jets stay there and fight the head-on battle with ISIS?
Well, there are many jets. The countries have a lot more jets than just the Canadian jets, and they're doing a bombing mission in Iraq and Syria, and it's having a certain amount of positive impact, I'm certain, because they're continuing to do it. But it's not just dropping bombs that is the only thing Canada can do.
A lot of people still don't get why you're against bombing, and you can't do both bombing and training at the same time. Are you morally opposed to bombing?
No, I think as has been done in the past, you make decisions on a case-by-case basis as to where and how to engage Canadian troops.
So the Prime Minister has no moral objection to bombing. He thinks bombing has worked at times, but he still seems to be unable, or this government seems to be unable to actually say exactly why it is they want to get out of bombing. Chantal?
And they, including this interview, have yet to provide a rationale that most of us would readily understand. It seems to me that the Prime Minister had opportunity to tweak his position after what happened in Paris, and he didn't seize the opportunity, which is why I think they will stick to their campaign promise. I wonder sometimes if they're sticking to it because it was a campaign promise, in the same way that they were speeding that train to welcome thousands of refugees that they were never going to get in the country before January 1st until they suddenly stopped just before the wall was in front of them. If that's the case, they may, in hindsight, when they look back at this period, think that they might have acted differently.
Shachi, could they flip on that issue? I mean, not will they, but if they did, how would the public react to a change of heart on that?
I think the question could also be asked, how will the public react if they don't flip on it? Because as with the refugee deadline issue, this was something that Canadians had a tremendous amount of concern about. And you see the same thing with the ISIS mission. We see about half of Canadians saying that if we pull the bombing missions, if we pull those CF-18s out of the theater of war, it actually hurts our international reputation. And remember, this is a government that is so focused on brand Canada and this notion that Canada went somewhere and now Canada is back and we want to do better by our obligations on the international stage. Well, 1 in 2 Canadians actually think that if we don't keep doing this, we're going to hurt ourselves on the international stage.
You got the last word, Jennifer.
Well, I think that the only reason that we could have for them not changing their mind is political, and that's that they want to do something differently than the Conservatives did, and that's why they're going to pull the planes out and do something different. That's the only logical explanation for what's happening.
All right, I'm going to leave it at that, but we'll also leave viewers with the knowledge that Jennifer's got a new job. She's going to be the editor-in-chief of Policy Options, which is a really important magazine in Canada in terms of discussing policies like this one that we've just done tonight. So Canadian press will miss her. Policy Options, the lucky victors in this one. Shachi Kurl, thanks for joining us. We'll see you again, I'm sure. And Chantal in Edmonton this week.